Hi. One of the things you just mentioned is that in some of the proprietary vendors where they supply lots of different software, obviously they should be working nicely together across the different teams. With open source, we have Red Hat, we have credativ, we have EDB. How do we continue to see that the companies that provide the enterprise level support we need are working tightly and continuing to work tightly together to make sure we have less gaps tomorrow with open source than we have today with open source? So how do we see the tie-up between the open source enterprise support community rather than the open source project communities to make sure that enterprise gets the full support? And we have a support provider here.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm looking to see how the different groups providing enterprise open source technologies work together.
You want to run that, Michael?
Sure. I mean, it's easy for me to answer because we do provide enterprise level support for all the open source pieces. So we kind of integrate all of this. But I think the most important part there is, yes, something might happen to company X, Y, or Z with their open source product, but it's still open source. Somebody like us or any other company could take over the source and could give you the help you need. When you go into proprietary space and that company goes out of business for whatever reason, you're lost. There is no way to get anything for this software. And that cannot happen in open source. And that's why it's important that we have communities. As Chris mentioned before, Red Hat works with communities. It's not that Red Hat creates all the software. It's the relationship with those open source communities that's important. And an open source community of something that's mission critical for you should never be one person. It should always be a group of people. Like we have 30 committers in Postgres roughly, and we have more than 100 people constantly sending patches. So the chances that all of them disappear are exactly 0.
And even just as important as open source is open standards. For example, we're all containerizing our applications these days, and having an open container initiative which standardizes the image format as well as the runtime to ensure portability and flexibility in deploying on any provider is because not just it's open source, but it's open standards. And that's a very key part to making open source successful and to building that ecosystem so that other vendors can play nicely together and the things interoperate as well.
Ed?
Yeah, I think inside your question is kind of there's a harder topic to talk about in the middle of that. And that's the idea that there can be commercial interest and business, an organized business and commercial focused operation also connected to open source. Because I think, we want to embrace the best of what community can deliver, right, for the benefit of an enterprise, but we also know that there's a practical side that has to deal with SLAs and the ability to get help and support in similar fashions to the way you might normally get it from a traditional proprietary vendor. And then when you kind of search through a community, it's really difficult to get the kind of commitment to answers and support and feedback and features and engineering you might need that you would typically get from a proprietary vendor. And having done this for 15 years, I long ago at Red Hat got over the idea that there's an incompatibility between a business commercial interest and an open source project. In fact, those things can and need to live alongside each other. And I think Red Hat's done that really well. I think it's one of the underpinnings of what we've been trying to do in Enterprise DB. And so you just even look at events like this. What these things, what we're hoping to demonstrate is, in fact, there is a really rich and healthy commercial ecosystem that supports entirely the open source project and the open source body of work. And those things are completely compatible. And so as you sit back and say, okay, well, what would that mean? One, I would think you got to look at companies that have, I think you got to pay attention to companies that have shown endurance and durability. And what I mean by that is there's been continuity of the ability to contribute to the community, develop strong partnerships that build ecosystem, and perform financially so that those are companies that can be with you for the long term. I don't think anybody questions whether Red Hat is going to be available to them to help them. And so guys like me who work in companies like Enterprise DB, this is a big priority. So while we work on the technology development side, we also work on the business side, which includes developing quality relationships with other key partners and other key players in the market. And I think you got to size the companies up on those dimensions too. You got to size them up on the technical chops and the true commitment to the projects that they're supporting, and you got to size them up on the business chops. And I think that's totally in bounds. I don't think it's just in bounds, I think it's an absolute requirement. And I think what you'll find when you study that really closely, that some of those companies will fail some of the tests. And that's where I think you'll find, find points of risk. But, this whole event is kind of built up around this concept of demonstrating to the market that Postgres has an incredibly rich ecosystem that includes really strong commercial players who are participating. Look what you saw here. AWS is participating. You saw Infor here. You saw the IBM guys. I mean, these are kind of stalwarts of enterprise IT and industry. So I think those are the real underpinnings that you got to look for. So if you're evaluating, I think you got to really measure like that.
Yeah,
and we want you to measure us like that. That's the name of the game.